I'm Carolyn Parrs, communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a clean energy future without leaving anyone behind. Join me as we explore the technologies, policies, and human stories that can make clean energy not just sustainable for our planet, but accessible for everyone. Today is all about beginnings. How do you start an energy equity program? I've asked 6 experts to weigh in from across utilities, policy, and research to share what it really means to take that first step. And here's a step I would love you to take. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Just Power. I can't emphasize how important that one little step is. It helps us to bring on guests that are committed to creating clean, affordable, reliable, clean energy for everyone, no matter what their zip code. It also helps us get the word out, right? So that more and more energy providers integrate energy equity into their systems, which is what this episode is all about today. You'll hear practical insights on engaging communities, on building programs, on co-creating solutions that reflect the people that they were meant to serve, right? So if you've been wondering where to begin, start with subscribing and then listen, because this episode today is an invitation to start where you are.
Don't feel overwhelmed, just start where you are. And that simple engagement with your community representatives can help to identify what's most important to those set of customers who have the greatest burden. Once you know that, then you can start to co-develop solutions that could then be brought forward to your governing body for implementation. And start where you are. You know, perhaps you can do a pilot scale implementation to get some quick wins. There could be a very strong branding opportunity to promote what you're doing and really gain traction with your larger set of customer stakeholder groups. But, you know, I think starting where you are and having that engagement with your customer base on what is most important to your consumers and how can our utilities as anchor institutions do more to help those who can ill afford to pay more.
NREL brings the modeling and analysis and this community engagement in terms of social science and really capturing and coalescing what we heard from those communities. And I think that's the biggest part, right? Is to engage underserved, lower income communities of color, you know, folks from a broad range of those stakeholder groups in the decision making, in the prioritization, and refrain from, whether it be your engineers or your leadership or anyone else, from making those decisions for others, right? For those who are struggling to pay their energy bills, really engaging them because they are interested in this clean energy transition, in the equity and benefiting and participating in it and helping it succeed. So really engaging those and make sure that you develop equity metrics, right? So that you can measure where you are and where you want to go in ways that reflect those priorities of those underserved communities.
First is that recognition, right? Recognizing that, you know, within your utility territory that there are vulnerabilities that certain communities have that others don't, right? And so that's everything from affordability to proximity to energy infrastructure, right? Or lack of access or, you know, overexposure, right? And so you kind of need to kind of classify people across some continuum to understand what makes them more or less vulnerable when it comes to, you know, energy equity issues. So there's some principles of energy justice like availability, affordability. One is due process, and so participation. I know a lot of times people are apprehensive about community engagement. But I do think there are opportunities for advisory councils or for, workshops and listening sessions where you bring people in to kind of understand what the concerns are and do it outside of the traditional kind of rate case that you're taking to your public service commission, so you can bring the heat down a little bit, right? And so it's some of these informal engagement opportunities, I think, that we get so stuck in the kind of rigor of our required public participation processes that we don't, do it outside of that. And so if you're meeting the community for the first time because you're about to ask for an increase in energy rates, then, a lot of your time is going to be tense. And so, and there are some good examples of some, kind of innovation hubs and things across the country in different utilities. Um, and so, one of the things I've been thinking about too is how do we bring those folks together so we can begin to share and learn the best practices across. So how do we do energy equity? And so they'll select folks from across the utility to come together, and they may work together as a team for some time to develop a project to come up with a pilot they might propose in their next rate case, or something they might try out, or they learn about some data that the utility collects and they analyze it in a different way so they can design a pilot program. When I was at Department of Energy, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office launched something called C2C, Communities to Clean Energy. And it was this idea of being able to bring communities, utilities, and either state, local government together to think about clean energy plans. We also did another one called Communities LEAP, Communities Local Energy Action Program. And that was very similar. We brought together community and business and government to put together clean energy plans so they could then go after resources to actually implement. And so it was this idea that we knew it wasn't enough just to have resources available for communities or resources available for utilities or resources available for governments. We needed some way for these entities to begin to talk to each other. And then we wrote that into a lot of the infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act funding because they had already done the planning. And so now that same coalition could go after funding in those larger bills.
I think one of the main things is to talk. I think, to talk to policymakers, to talk to people in the different parts of the landscape, the citizens, but also corporations, unions, education, and just try to follow a holistic approach. I mean, that sounds a bit trite, but the way that we tried to do it was to be quite systematic in, really drilling down what's the kind of scope, what you're actually looking for in terms of a just transition, what level, what's your boundaries, and then to kind of think about the presenting problems, we call it, the sort of context, what is the current situation in terms of social justice, for example, and how can you address that, and what are your sort of long-term aims, and just go through it in that way, and to think about, how you might measure that. We really put a lot of emphasis on measurement, and I was, looking at the latest COP where they reported on just transition, and it was really obvious that there were no sort of agreed measures, and it was very hard to therefore say you're responsible for that in your country, because you don't know what you're measuring against. You're just kind of saying, we want to have a just transition. So, okay, put that into practice. What do you mean by that? How do you break that down? The result is that we have something that other people can borrow from now, and, be inspired by, hopefully, to just in terms of like mapping what do you want out of this just transition program you're delivering. We have a set of about 50 odd outcomes that you can have a look at and say, that fits. That's completely out of scope, yeah. And just the way of thinking about what do you want to achieve, I think just defining that as clearly as you can, it is just a real help when you're designing any kind of program.
P&M is among very few energy companies in the United States with a tribal government relations office and staffed and directed by a team, as we talked about, who are indigenous and come from communities that we serve. So we feel like we have this inherent understanding of the people, the culture, the issues and opportunities because we grew up in these communities. And I really believe that it is crucial for any company to have a tribal office if you're interacting with tribes. And it's not enough to have a quote unquote liaison, if you will. I know the definition of liaison of, certainly working the tribes, but we took it to a whole new level of having it at a leadership level. And that took time, that took education, that took advocacy, but it took the understanding of P&M leadership to understand that it's not just about consultation, if you will, to check the box to say that you checked in with that tribe. I report directly, to a vice president, and I meet with the president and COO on a regular basis. And we often, when we need to engage our leadership at the highest level with our tribal leaders, and because we understand that tribal leaders are regarded above even state governors, certainly mayors and officials, and in part is because of the tribal trust relationship, the trust responsibility with the U.S. government.
I would say in this early stage, there's testing. So we're going to see more and more utilities that are, let's say, more closer to the beginning of their energy equity journeys. They're going to be launching programs and designing goals and metrics to address equity and just getting started. And then maybe utilities that are a little further along in their understanding or administration of energy equity efforts, maybe those folks are going to kind of pivot and rethink what they're doing or continue to have, more maturity of those programs. I can't read the future, but I think these issues are going to only become more important in this industry and also more broadly in the public sector and in other sectors. I think issues of inequality and equity and justice have been driving many parts of our society for the entire history of this country, and I think they will continue to. It's something we'll continue to struggle with, and that'll be felt in the utility sector.
I hope these voices sparked some ideas for you on how your organization can begin to take those first steps towards energy equity. And if this episode inspired you, go ahead and share it with a colleague or an energy leader who might be ready to make a change. All right, so till next time, keep listening, keep learning, and let's keep building Just Power, because we're all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.